NASA 557, contact tower 128.15.
Caution, caution. Manual, fuel, manual, fuel.
I'm John Goglia.
I'm Greg Feith.
And I'm Todd Curtis.
And we are the Flight Safety Detectives.
Between us, we have over a century of aviation accident investigation and safety experience to draw on as we discuss issues that affect all of us.
So we are qualified to share our perspectives on accidents and incidents and what can be learned from them for the future.
We're proud to say we've got three sponsors that really relate to the topic of aviation safety: the Professional Aviation Maintenance Association, or PAMA, Piston Power, and Avemco Insurance, a world-class provider of aviation insurance. Later on in the show, we'll tell you how you can get a 5% discount on your insurance just for listening to the show.
We don't just dissect the official reports. In every episode, we identify safety issues and take the mystery out of accident investigations.
So maybe pilots and their planes can have safer flights ahead.
Well, hello, gentlemen. It is another episode of Flight Safety Detectives. It's always good to be with you. Unfortunately, I've had really a crazy schedule. I picked up a number of major accidents over the last month, and unfortunately has caused me to, be away from you guys. But for today, we are now going to be talking again about Air India, a Boeing 787-800, or -8, I should say, that departed in India and unfortunately crashed within a minute after takeoff. There's a lot going on in this accident over the past week. A lot of speculation. The thing that I'm really amazed about is how many new 787 experts have now come to light over the internet. And of course, it's always entertaining, but it's also distressing, because a lot of the information that is publicized, talked about by a variety of people, talking heads, who have some or various levels of expertise, including us, are providing information, much of which is misinformation. It's just pure speculation without any fact base, and there's no logic to it. And I've been on TV, as I know you both have, trying to not talk about what we think caused this crash, because we don't have any data. We're not actually part of the investigation. Are we getting information? Absolutely. Is it credible and valid? Absolutely. Do we try to factor that into our discussion as things that will be examined? Absolutely. But we are not concluding anything. However, there are a lot of conclusions that have already been drawn, whether it's the fact that this flight crew got an 8,000 plus hour pilot who is actually a training captain with an 1,100 hour first officer. We don't know how much time they had in the 787, but talking about the fact that you have these pilots who didn't set the flaps for takeoff, the flaps and the slats, and took off and used all this runway and crashed the airplane. Of course, you got dual engine failure. You've got all sorts of systems failures. You've got a variety of explanations without really any fact. We have looked at the videos that are out there. There are two videos out there, one of which has sound. And so you can come up with some factual statements. Those facts are just facts. They don't put you in any kind of direction to come up with a cause or contributing factor statement, but they are facts. And what at least I've tried to do, especially on Facebook recently, is provide an explanation of my observations of the video of how certain aircraft systems work on that airplane, to try and chill some of the misinformation that is just rampant out there. And we see that all the time after accidents. And that not only is really probably, it's just not proper for the aviation industry, but it's even more distressing to family and friends of all the victims on that aircraft and the flying public in general. John, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and I'm going to turn it over to you right now. But I think for our audience, we're going to provide an update. This is several days after the accident. We're going to talk about issues. We're going to talk about what we think are factual findings that, unless something, out of the extraordinary or ordinary pop up, they're pretty solid facts based on what we have all done. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to you, John.
All right, so I was just going to raise the issue or state that the problem that we're seeing is 25 years in the making with the news media, 24-hour news media. They reached out to a lot of people to fill the time, and I know you, Greg, as well as we don't go on some shows because the witnesses or the talking heads that they had before they were scheduling us, we're just not going to follow them because they're just out the left field. Yeah. But now it's even worse. I mean, when Air Midwest crashed in the early 2000s, I had that accident, and all these so-called experts were all putting stories out there, and they were actually negatively impacting the investigation. They were causing us grief, and I made the decision to put out the raw data from the flight data recorder, which angered a lot of people in Washington. I got a number of calls about that, but it had to be done because that so-called experts were causing us grief during the course of the investigation. So it's nothing new. The internet has just exacerbated the problem. So many people that are just out there, they don't need to even be asked to be on. They got an audience just by logging on their computer. And it's not right what they're doing, but there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Speaking as someone who came about to prominence talking about these things because of the internet, I will say one thing about these folks. I don't want to call them clowns because I don't want to use foul language on this show. But the reason I started even making any efforts almost 30 years ago to try and get my view out there is I was watching TV one night after an accident, and there was somebody who came on who was talking complete nonsense. I thought to myself, I can do a better job than this clown. Well, I tried to prove it.
That's always been the premise of our show here. And that is, look, there's a lot of information. We're going to try and dissect that information. We're going to explain the information. We're going to, separate fact from fiction. And, unless we're going to actually dissect all the way down to the nth degree, like we did with the MAX accidents and a number of the other case studies that we do, where we come up with the probable cause or we challenge the probable cause or causes that have been determined not only by the NTSB, but others around the world. Again, right now, we don't have very good factual information. We have 2 videos. We have pictures of the wreckage from the accident site. We have very cryptic information. We have very cryptic information about the flight crew other than total time, but we don't really know what their experience and their training, and we don't know all the policies and procedures of Air India and a variety of other things. But the concern here is that when you, within 24 hours, have speculated that because you have, quote, inexperience in the cockpit, possibly by a first officer who only has 1,100 hours total time, but we don't know how much time they have in the aircraft, to make an affirmative statement that it's evident or obvious that, one, either the crew didn't set the flaps and the slats for takeoff, which is just illogical and unreasonable to think, given all the safeguards, and we'll talk about that a little more, but given all the safeguards of the 787 and the electronics in this airplane, or to say that you have 2 professional pilots, one being a less seasoned pilot, if you will, who doesn't know the difference between the flap handle and the landing gear handle and inadvertently pulled the flaps when they should have pulled the gear. That too does not make sense because it doesn't resonate as logical. Why? They've just gone through training. They are experienced. They are qualified on this airplane. And yes, I know all the, people have been lighting me up trying to say, well, it's happened in the past that flight crews haven't set the flaps. I understand that. Northwest 255, they didn't set the flaps. Or we've had inadvertent, flap retraction, not on schedule when the airplane was not in a configuration that the flap should have. I understand all of that But again, you have to look at the facts, the conditions, and the circumstances of this accident, not the 30 other accidents and incidents that have happened in the past. There may be similarities, but again, we don't know all the dynamics. And we won't know the dynamics and the environment of what was taking place until we get better information from the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. All I've been trying to do, and I know we have been trying to do that in our respective ways in the media, is to provide explanation and at least try to quell some of the misinformation that's out there. Whether it's, how could the pilots take off with no flaps? Well, again, there are checklists that even if you don't set the flaps and slats, the checklist won't let you keep going unless the airplane is properly configured. I've never said that the flaps and slats that are deployed, as we're going to talk about, I'm firmly on solid ground that the flaps and the slats were extended or deployed to an extent. Whether they were actually the right setting for the weight and the temperature conditions and the runway, I've never said that they were or they weren't. I just said that the flaps and the slats were deployed. And here's the physical evidence that demonstrates that. And so, again, everybody, wants to light me and a bunch of other people up. And of course, we're lighting up other people for providing misinformation. But I mean, we have not, at least I have not come to any conclusion whether or not any of the things that I've talked about or tried to explain on the internet, on Facebook, is a cause or a contributing factor. I'm just saying these are artifacts as we know them of the sequence of events. They may change based on new data.
They're a piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
Right? That's all they are, is a piece of the puzzle.
And a little context here for the audience. We're recording this on the 15th of June. The event happened on the 12th of June, 2025. And most of the misinformation we're discussing came out within 48 hours.
Yes.
As we talked off air beforehand, some of this came from newly minted 787 experts, people who did not have any professional experience flying the aircraft, designing the aircraft, maintaining the aircraft, are putting forth their theories on what happened to this aircraft. And we're just here to say it's very early in the process. And there's a lot of very useful information, including the information from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, should they be recovered, that is not in anyone's hands yet.
Interestingly, all those commenters are commenting that, I fly the 737 and you can take off with the flaps out. I don't see a lot of people that fly the 787 on the internet commenting.
Yeah.
Right?
I have not
There's
seen
a
it.
lot of people that fly other airplanes. The 787 is highly automated. It took the 777 one step further. Right. So, things like your trim system that have caused accidents on the 737. When you push the power levers forward on a 787, it's going to move the trim to zero. You don't have to do anything because the airplane knows that you're not going to take off with trim already plugged in. There's a whole host of things in this airplane that automated. Greg, you mentioned the checklist. If you skip a step or a step is wrong, the checklist stops, and you're not going to be able to finish the checklist.
Correct. And in fact, there are two checklists prior to you actually pushing the thrust levers up. And then there's an after takeoff checklist. But in this case, if the flaps and the slats weren't set on the ground, and I mean, the checklist is monitoring the actions of the pilots. And if you didn't set that, it's going to tell you, you can't keep going with this checklist. And if you ignore that, you get on the runway and you shove the thrust levers up, you're going to get, an audible warning as well as a visual warning saying takeoff configuration. You got a configuration warning. So unless you're going to completely ignore the smartness of the airplane and attempt to take off anyway with the airplane not properly configured, that is not on the airplane in any way, shape, or form. That's a pilot issue. But again, you have professional pilots. They're airline pilots flying for basically a national carrier. And they've been qualified by their respective authority, and they've been qualified by their respective airline to operate that airplane at the highest levels of safety. So to just say, well, these guys, they just didn't set the flaps because we can see in the video that the flaps were not extended. Well, again, I've gone through a lengthy explanation on the internet, and we've had this offline discussion, but to just boil it all down, There are multiple flap settings on the 787. 0, which is flaps up, 1, 5, 10, 15, 18, so on. If you don't understand how the flaps work on the airplane, or you try to compare it to a Cessna 172, then your conclusions are wrong.
The benefit of those watching the video version of this, we have on the screen right now a graphic that Greg supplied that showed from the side what flaps 0, what flaps 1 degree, etc. look like. And that sort of might explain some of the, let's just say, less than intelligent comments about, oh, the flaps weren't deployed, that some people have put out online. So if you could take us through that graphic a bit, tell us what, what happens with flaps 1 or flaps 5, and when would you use that?
When you look at that particular graphic, you can see that there's up, which is 0, 1, 5, 10, 15, 18, so on. The way this flap system works is when you go flaps 1, typically that's the leading edge device called the slats that'll deploy. And the flaps will extend basically aft. They do not initially fall trailing edge down like you would see on a small general aviation airplane, that when you put them in the first flap setting, that now the flap actually goes trailing edge down. These actually extend out. So flaps 1 and flaps 5, the wing actually just gets wider. And it is not very evident when they extend aft that they are extended unless you can actually see down on them. These videos are being shot by either security camera or a handheld phone from the ground. You have one that's directly behind the airplane. That's the airport security video. And then the other video is shot from basically an oblique angle from the lower right aft side of the airplane as the airplane is flying away. And people are going, look, the flaps aren't out, because they're expecting to actually see the trailing edge down, blocking at least some perception or perspective of the engine nacelle or the exhaust from the engine, because on a lot of airplanes, when the flaps are down, and if you're looking at it from behind, yeah, it will blank out part of the engine. That's not the case.
And from the oblique angle video you mentioned, you pointed out something about the landing gear that gave you an indication as to what might have been happening with the landing gear at that phase of flight.
Yeah, so on top of the flaps, and you can actually see if you blow the video up, take a screenshot and blow it up, you can actually see the leading edge device, the slats are extended. So we at least know that the slats are extended. There is also pictures from the accident site that show the slats and the flaps deployed. We don't know if they were in a proper position for the weight and the conditions for takeoff, but it is evident by the physical evidence, which investigators use in cooperation with the data that's on a flight data recorder, that the flaps and the slats were in a deployed position. Whether or not they were in the right position, that's yet to be determined by the investigators. When you look at the landing gear, people have been very concerned about the fact that the landing gear should have been up, especially with the airplane climbing to better than 600 feet, which is only about 400 feet above the ground. But you have, as soon as you rotate, you establish a positive rate of climb, it is positive rate gear up. Well, everybody is concerned about the fact that the gear is still hanging. And they're saying, we'll see the pilot, one of the pilots, mistakenly raised the flaps rather than raising the landing gear. Well, if you understand how the landing gear operates on this 787, it has a tilt function. The gear, the bogey on the main gear, has to be in a certain position when it's retracted into the wing. On takeoff, what happens is, as soon as the airplane lifts off, the bogey is in a trailing position. When you move the handle to the up position, there is an auto tilt feature, which with the bogies, if the trailing edge wheels are aft, this auto tilt function will now tilt the whole bogey so that you have the forward wheels now down and the trailing wheels up. And that's the way it needs to retract into the wheel well. You can see from the video that the bogies on the main landing gear are tilted forward. The only way they can get tilted forward is if the retraction sequence has been initiated by the position of the handle. They don't just automatically do that. So somebody did, in fact, put the gear handle in the up position, and the tilt function tilted the bogey to the nose down or basically the forward wheels down position. Now, that says that the handle was up. But why didn't the gear retract? That's a hydraulic issue. And that began, of course, will create a whole nother storyline. Why was there insufficient or no hydraulics to actually retract the gear? The sequencing function is electric, basically. So the sequencing of the bogie tilt started, but it's hydraulic pressure, John, that really creates enough of the force to start to retract, or at least retract the gear up into the well. And there's a number of explanations: total hydraulic failure, partial hydraulic failure, even an electrical failure, because the hydraulic pumps are electric. You worked on these airplanes, John. I mean, again, you can have a partial failure of the landing gear system.
Well, actually, there's multiple hydraulic systems. And normally what you have is the landing gear is not on the same system as the flight controls. So you can have a hydraulic leak that takes the hydraulic pressure off the landing gear and does not affect the flight controls system. All right. So, and we skipped over one point for the captain and the co-pilot, and that's the different shape of the handles in the cockpit. And the landing gear handle has a big round knob on it that somewhat looks like a wheel. All right. So that's a tactile feel. So you could have a dark cockpit, no light whatsoever, and the pilot could reach over and know that he's getting the landing gear handle because it feels right in his hand.
And that's an international standard. That's not a Boeing standard or a 787 standard. This is something that virtually every airliner on planet Earth has that same.
Every aircraft that has a retractable landing gear has this.
Right. So it's just another clue for a pilot that he's got the right handle when he's raising the gear. And so, yes, if they had a total hydraulic failure on the side that has the landing gear on it, that could change it. And you're right, it's an electrical pulse that puts the bogie in the right position. And the pumps are electrical. The whole airplane's electrical. So which gives a little more credence to the problem that was reported the day before with the electrical problems on the airplane. But we don't know. There's multiple buses on the airplane, and a bus is just an electrical system, like a fuse in your house that has the bathroom lights and the switches in the bedroom on the same circuit breaker. Well, the bus on the airplane has systems on that same feed of electricity, and the cabin items will definitely not be on the same feed as a flight control or flight instruments. Anything critical for flight will not be on the same bus as passenger convenience items.
There's also a couple of items from the first video, the oblique angle video, that we should discuss. One of them being an audio analysis, and you were telling us this, Greg, off the air, seems to indicate that there was a sound consistent with the ram air turbine being deployed on this aircraft.
Yeah, the ram air turbine actually is positioned just slightly off-center to the right and aft of the main landing gear on the belly of the airplane. Now, there are multiple antennas down there, and again, it's blurry video when you try to blow it up. But there is also audio on one of the videos that sounds consistent with the little propeller that is spinning when the rat drops. It's now spinning a propeller to provide both hydraulic and electrical sources for certain aircraft systems. And it makes a very unique noise because it's a small propeller turning at a very high rate, and it's very distinct. And you can hear sounds on the one video that are similar as the airplane flies in close proximity to the camera. A lot of the information, and I think it hasn't been totally confirmed, but if the rat did drop, then that is indicative that now there is a systems issue. Now, a lot of people have attributed the dropping of the rat to it. See, it's a dual engine flameout or a dual engine failure. That's only one of 10 different things that will drop the rat. the rat can drop. You can still have two perfectly good engines, and the rat will drop because you have a total system failure of the hydraulics, the electrics. And then, of course, if the pilots really think there's a problem, they can manually drop the rat as well. So you don't have to have a dual engine failure, which is one of these 10 elements, to have the rat drop. And so that, again, is one of those things that needs to be determined by the data from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder.
We're going to take a short break now to meet one of Avemco's employees from their Frederick, Maryland office.
Hi, my name is Marcy Veroni, and I'm in charge of training the underwriters that work here at Avemco. We have a Redbird simulator that we use in our training. It's a 172S model. Our local flight school also has 172s, so we hope that the non-pilots get the interest to go and then become pilots. But regardless, everybody that work here goes through ground school, either Sporties or King, and then we actually put them in the sim. We hire local CFIs to come in and take them through different scenarios. Then we take them to the airport. They've all watched an engine being torn down. They've all pre-flighted an airplane. Most of them have gone for a flight in an airplane. But the reason why I really like the sim is when there is a claim somewhere around the country, we're able to bring our team in here and fly the scenario and kind of teach them the mindset of the pilot and might have, what went wrong, or is there anything from our point of view that we can help with the next caller that maybe wants to buy that airplane or do the scenario. So
when you're talking to an Avemco underwriter, you're getting somebody who really understands aviation. Even if they don't have a pilot certificate, they do understand aviation. You can tell them your story, you can give them your information, and they can do a fair and appropriate evaluation to issue you insurance.
And now, back to the flight safety detectives.
There is some unvalidated information with regard to the Mayday call that apparently the captain made. At least that's what it's being attributed to. But I'll call it, one of the pilots made a Mayday call. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Now, some news outlets have gone even beyond that to say it was a Mayday, 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 losing power or lost power, can't climb, for all intent and purposes. So there's some explanation for the Mayday. Others haven't confirmed those actual words. But again, if you assume that you have two good engines, then it may be a different systems problem. If you do have at least a rollback or a loss of thrust, that too can cause the rat to drop. However, and we can get into this after we go through these mechanical things that we're talking about, is aircraft performance. You got two 80,000-pound plus engines out there as far as producing thrust. You go from takeoff power, whatever that is, takeoff power under those conditions, to zero thrust, the flight profile of that airplane is going to be dramatically different than what is shown in those videos. And again, that's the whole purpose of accident investigation. Did they have a rollback of the thrust? Was it an instantaneous loss of thrust on both engines? Now you have to break all of that down to determine, okay, what's common to both engines? Fuel. Okay, what's with the fuel? Is it a fuel system delivery problem on the airplane? Is it, I know that a lot of people speculated they ran through a flock of birds. Well, the DGAC has said there's no evidence that there was a bird strike, so you rule that out. So what other non-mechanical or mechanical issues happen, excuse me, to simultaneously shut both engines down? Because you have a better chance of winning the lottery than that happening on an airplane like that in normal service use. So, John, again, we've gone through this. We've talked about this. Is it a rare event? Absolutely. It could happen and can happen. The question is, one, did it happen? And if it did, How did it happen?
Right. Well, one of the things that I thought about when we talked about it, this has what we call a FADEC, or it's an electronic fuel control on the airplane. And, people have said, well, if you lost power in the airplane, like that passenger video said, you'll lose control of the engines. Wrong. They have their own power supply. But even if the FADEC fails, there's a process in there, and I'm straining to remember it all. But if I remember right, the FADEC will go to 85% thrust. Right. And then you have to shut the engine down yourself manually, pull the fire handle to turn it off. But it's a fail-safe. The engine is going to go to a power setting that, if you're flying, it's going to keep you out of trouble and give you some time to settle, square away things. So that losing power and losing the engine because of non-functioning electrical system is wrong. Right, so the engine will continue to function.
And along those same lines, John, I've been researching because I've got a lot of information. I got flight manuals and that kind of stuff for the 787. I've heard some chatter and seen it on the internet that, oh, well, if they lost the fuel delivery system, fuel pumps, because those engines require positive pressure in the fuel. That too is not true. Like you said, you could have a total electrical failure, shut down every electric driven fuel pump on those engines, and the engines will still function because they have a gravity suck, gravity feed system to keep the engines running. And again,
Right.
It's all about having appropriate and proper information. Just because one other airplane, 737, 727, 757, it's not a 787. They have different systems, even between the 787-8, -9, and -10, because somebody had made all of these comments that the landing gear doors, soon as the airplane breaks ground, there is an air ground switch that the gear doors automatically deploy open. That's true on the -9 and -10 versions. Doesn't happen on a -8. So now people are throwing all of this, quote, source information, because we got so many new 787 experts out there throwing this information out that just isn't valid.
Before we go on, there was one other piece of that video that you wanted to mention, that some of the close-ups showed some sort of black object tumbling as the aircraft was going out of the picture. And there was some speculation it fell off the plane, but there's no telling what that is. And there are other possibilities you were mentioning.
And if you look at the timing of where you see this black object that departs from the flight path of the aircraft, I had to watch it numerous times thinking, well, is that an artifact of the video? Because the video was shot, I think, on a phone or something, and it was, it wasn't the best video. So is that an artifact of the video, or at least the reproduction of the video, or is this actually a physical object? Well, if you look at the timing of where the airplane was in relation to your perspective as the airplane is descending behind what looks like a line of trees or buildings or objects out there, was that something that could have come from the ground because of the excessive thrust being produced by the engines? That is, if you have a lot of thrust being pumped out the tailpipe of those engines and it comes across the top of a building, did it blow something off the top of the building? Roof, shingles, that kind of stuff. Is that what that is? And again, it's going to be dependent on the investigation, looking at the physical evidence and, of course, any other evidence from the flight data recorder and even the cockpit voice recorder. And in fact, if I recall correctly, and I'm pretty sure, this aircraft does have a digital video recorder on it. Now, there's been a lot of talk here of late, especially around the United States, and the NTSB has made numerous recommendations about having video recorder in the cockpit. I don't believe this is in the cockpit. I think it's cabin, and I think it's for cabin safety for a variety of different reasons. But that video, if in fact it does exist, could shed some light as well. But there are a lot of possibilities. It's not to say that that object actually came from the airplane. It could have been an artifact of excessive thrust as the airplane crossed over right before it struck the building. coming over the top of other buildings, since that's a very clustered area of objects.
There's also a unique piece of information that came from this crash. That was the single person who did survive this. There were some brief statements this person made to the press before he went to the hospital, which, again, I'm not sure if it's going to dovetail with the information from other sources, but we do have one person traumatized for sure who may be able to shed more light on this in the future.
And that you bring up a good point, Todd, because apparently from all the information that I've seen of the interview with that survivor, he said that he heard a loud bang or pop at some point during the flight prior to, and it could have been even at impact. But he described it. Even some ground witnesses described hearing a bang or a loud pop. Again, if that is some sort of anomalous operation with the aircraft, that should at least show up in some form or fashion on flight data recorder and or cockpit voice recorder recordings. And again, that's the purpose and really the necessity to wait for the good data to come out of the FDR and CVR before we actually start honing in on what that sequence of events is for the accident scenario. And again, all we're trying to do is explain, or at least give our viewers and listeners an understanding that there's some telltale signs in these videos that here's fact. The gear tilts forward for a reason. That's fact. And the only way that that's going to happen is if the gear handle is up. There's no challenge there. Go pull the flight manual. Go pull the maintenance manual. That's the description. So don't challenge me telling me that I'm, full of it. It's fact.
Now, another set of facts that we don't have in evidence yet is what settings the crew had, and that might be resolved by the two recorders, and also what information might have been fed into the flight management system before takeoff, all of which could determine whether or not certain alarms would have or would not have gone off during the takeoff roll, and would determine other things such as did the flight management system have a proper understanding of the circumstances of that moment, the temperature, the wind, etc.
And two, that's critical because your flap settings and your reduced thrust setting, because every airline basically is using reduced thrust in a cost-saving measure. These are large turbofan engines that do provide not only the necessary thrust, but some 757 has a lot of excessive thrust. So
this airplane does as well.
yes. And because of that, you don't want to burn more gas than you absolutely have to. It's all about dollars and cents. And
it's more than gas. It's more than gas.
It's time and service.
On.
Yeah.
Right.
But I don't mean to imply that was the cause or contributing factor. All I'm saying is that when the pilots put information into the flight management system to determine, okay, here's the necessary flap setting under these conditions. Here's the necessary thrust setting under these conditions. Here are your specific speeds, V1, VR, V2. These are the speeds the pilots use to actually initiate, take off, and fly through their first segment of the departure. The system has to have good information. You put a bad total weight. If the airplane was supposed to weigh 600,000 pounds and you only load in 550,000 pounds, now the airplane's going to calculate, okay, you only need this thrust at these speeds with these flap settings. Well, you start accelerating down the runway and the airplane's accelerating real slow. You're eating up a lot of runway waiting for the airplane to get to the necessary speed. Why? Because it weighs more than what you put in the box. And that could extend your ground roll on your takeoff. That could account for some of the issues early on that we're seeing why the crew used full length.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things that intrigued me on that second video from, I guess, closed circuit TV by the runway, we showed the airplane rolling down the runway. Right as it takes off, it looks like there's light brown dust coming off the ground. And I was wondering, what could that be? And given what we know about the length of the runway, what that design was for the airport, and what you should be seeing at that point in the takeoff roll, what do you think was going on there?
Well, that camera is pointed at the very end of the runway. It's located down at the departure end of that particular runway. And you are correct. There was a lot of dust and dirt that was blown up. That's a combination of thrust from the engines and the wake turbulence being generated by the wing. Because that, again, the takeoff is one of the most critical because the airplane is heavy, low, and slow. That is, it's at its heaviest weight, it's at its slowest speed as it's accelerating, and then once it starts into the climb, it'll accelerate. And then, of course, because of altitude, it's low. So you don't have a lot of margin of safety if something starts to go wrong, like in this case. You pointed it out, Todd, and it's a good perspective, and I know we're going to put it up. That crew had no place to go with that airplane other than straight ahead. Now, a lot of airports, like Denver International, we got a lot of open space off the end of our runways, or for the most part, off the end of the runways. This airport is surrounded by a lot of density as far as urban density. So going, 1,000 feet off the end of the runway, they're into buildings and all sorts of objects. There's no place to steer the airplane away from all of that kind of urban environment. So in this case, they're trying to fly this airplane, keep it flying. They had a nose up attitude or a pitch attitude. They had the wings level. And all they could do if they knew they were going down was to ride it in as best they could with an attitude of the aircraft that, they had no other choice other than to, hold. I mean, again, the airplane wasn't climbing. It was going down. It was settling into the ground. And all they could do is ride it in.
Now, I'd like to move to the actual investigation, or rather, how the investigation is being conducted. And last night I was looking at some video from a Indian television station which indicated that there was very little access control over the crash site. And one part that really struck me, the camera pans to a pile of baggage, and the reporter was saying, "Oh, as they find passenger baggage, they're putting them all in this one spot to safeguard them from being stolen." And I'm thinking, how is that possible that you can do this and not wreck the evidence trail that the investigators need to use?
And there is a lot of concern because there were a lot of other pictures where you saw people, both their, I guess, local gendarmes and then citizens rummaging through that accident site, walking on parts of the wreckage. There is indication that they were using heavy equipment to bulldoze or move a lot of the wreckage into piles, even before the investigators were really out there to, able to document it. And the physical wreckage, the documentation of the physical wreckage as it sits before it is removed is critical. Why? Because just because you have good information or what you perceive as good information off of a flight data recorder, let's say the flaps setting on the flight data recorder indicates they were at flaps 18. You need to go out and corroborate that against the physical evidence to determine, were those flaps in fact at 18? If they weren't at 18, why weren't they at 18? Is it because during the impact sequence, the system, the jack screws that actually manipulate the flaps, were the jack screws broken? Were the flaps broken? You have to corroborate that evidence. You can't take a lot of this stuff at face value because we have seen in the past data errors where something was recorded on the flight data recorder but didn't correspond to the flap handle setting in the cockpit or the physical evidence of the flaps. And that's why looking at the physical evidence is a crucial part of the investigation. But if you distort that pristine evidence, now you really don't know what's fact.
Greg, nobody focuses in the news or on any of these programs on the real spring that happens in an accident investigation. They all say the cause. But there's a whole host of other things that we discover in accident investigation that impact on the safety of flight. We look at the material failures. We look at the sequence of how the airplane broke up, which can help us design better airplanes in the future. There's hundreds, not just 100, hundreds of things that come out of accident reports that don't have anything to do with the probable cause, but contribute greatly to making travel safer. And by destroying all this evidence, if you will, of how the airplane broke up or how certain things happened, we lose all of that. This is the first accident for this type of airplane.
Yes.
And we've had the opportunity to get some data on how it broke up and many other things. And we're going to lose it all in this one because they moved it around.
Now,
So,
yeah, I mean, and that is an excellent point, John, because again, yeah, the only people that talk about it are the people that actually do accident investigation, like you, me, and Todd, and others. I won't say we're the only ones, but the investigators that are out there from not only the AAIB, but the National Transportation Safety Board, the FAA, Boeing, GE, and a variety of others. We understand that because that's the world we live in. That's the process. That's the mentality that we take into these investigations. Yes, we want to know cause and contributing factor to the accident itself, but there are all these peripheral issues that we can also learn from and enhance safety from. And that's why it is critical to have the best available information so that we can determine best available cause and contributing factor. And we've seen this in the past. We've been hampered in the past where we don't know if the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder are any good. This was a violent impact. There was a post-crash fire. We don't know the quality of the data that's going to come off of one or both of those boxes. Now, all of a sudden, let's say both boxes are cooked and we can't get any useful data. We now don't have pristine physical data from the evidence and the inspection of the evidence to come with any valid conclusions about whatever may be a systems issue on this airplane. And again, these are the critical aspects of the accident investigation. The rest of the world doesn't work the same way that we do here in the United States. I know that there's an edict now out that they want the investigative team to come up with basically conclusions about what caused this accident in 3 months. Those of us who have been there through these processes know that in 3 months, you're just scratching the surface, especially if there's any kind of post-accident testing or, getting into a simulator to run scenarios or examine component parts or do whatever is necessary. You can't get that done in 3 months. The only good thing about this and this particular airplane and these technically advanced aircraft, whether they're a small general aviation airplane or, of course, a commercial aircraft, is that basically from the time you're sitting at the gate and you've got power on that airplane, it's pumping data. It's pumping data to the airline. It's pumping data to the manufacturers, Boeing and GE, about the health of the airplane, because that's how maintenance can monitor what's going on, John, and you speak to this better than I. But we're monitoring the health of these airplanes so that when the airplane takes off, it gets to destination. Maintenance already knows, okay, man, we had a good day, nothing real serious with the airplane, or we have got a serious issue. It's been written up by the crew. Yeah, we saw where it started. We've been monitoring it, and we can fix it short order, have the crew in place to fix it at destination. So we do have that data, and it may be that the investigators and the DGAC over in India already have some understanding, because what I found curious was that they've already ordered, 3 days later, they've already ordered an inspection of Air India's 787 fleet. What are they inspecting? What are they focused on? What do they want Air India to look at in their 787 fleet? They must have some indication of something that is a target for these inspections.
Yeah, so that to expand on what you just said a little bit, there is a box on the airplane that takes limited data. It's mostly flight data type data and Wi-Fi's it to the terminal. So that's the first step. So when the airplane's on the gate, it's downloading the condition of the airplane. When it's in flight, the captain can have the airplane downloaded. They're observed. We've had that for a while. It's more and more robust. The flight data recorder in this airplane records way over 1,000 parameters. So it's got a ton of data on it. So it's going to take a little while to separate all that data and figure it out, assuming it's a good box. So yes, there's a lot of sources of information, but I, I'm crying that we lost the physical data.
Yeah.
Because so often it makes a major difference.
Oh, it does. And again, you can't take things in the world of accident investigation. You have to corroborate data. You can't, I mean, we do that with witnesses. Witness says, yeah, I saw the airplane. It was on fire when it hit the ground. You go out there and you go, there's no evidence of any fire with the wreckage. You have to be able to have sources of information to corroborate, whether it's a witness statement or data, to ensure that it's valid. Because you can go down rabbit holes or start to come up with wrong causes and contributing factors based on bad data. Bad data in, bad data out.
Right, that's another piece. Right, people think the flight data recorder, we got this. They don't understand that the flight data recorder is just like a hard disk in your computer. Right, it's recording zeros and ones. But the zeros and ones, let's just take one piece of it. The throttles. What's the setting on the throttles? That is set. Those are adjustable. So each carrier can have a different setting. So if I'm looking at the Air India box on a United Airlines readout, the numbers may not agree, even though the setting may actually be the same for both operators' airplanes. But because Air India or United tweaked it a little bit to meet their needs, they don't agree, and you can't assume those zeros and ones off of one company's flight data recorder is going to correspond to what the other company's zeros and ones are. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why the first day or two of having a recorder, you don't get any information off them, because there's so many variables in there. And and then speaking of variables, there's one other one. It's how we operate the airplanes. In the United States, Boeing gives us an airplane. Right? The company can change the way we operate it. Same thing over Europe. Now, when the company changes it here in the United States, the FAA really digs in, wants to know why. But I know you, Greg, and I have seen it in South Asia, for one, where the company just tells the authority, this is our manual. We don't care. You don't approve it. You're not going to approve it. This is the way we're going to operate it. And they can change the takeoff settings, the power settings, every setting, with a stroke of a pen. This is how we're operating our airplane. Yeah. And sometimes those are wrong. And we've seen it even in the United States, that sometimes when they tweak them, they're wrong. Then they can cause an incident or some damage to the airplanes because of it.
And again, not all training programs for commercial airline pilots flying 787s around the world are created equal. Some are very good, very thorough. Some, you get enough information about how to operate the airplane to be dangerous. And all of these different aspects come together in a confluence to really determine the direction of the investigation and then the causes and contributing factors. To just say, okay, yeah, they had a dual engine flameout. That was the cause of the accident. That's not the cause of the accident. That is the result of something else that led to a dual engine flameout. If it was a fuel system, why? Was it contamination? If it was contamination, then where did the contamination come from? Well, it came from the airport when they uploaded fuel. Well, why was there contaminated fuel up? So now you build that whole chain of events. The fact that they had a dual engine flameout didn't cause the accident. That was just one element in the chain of events that caused that accident.
A while ago, I was actually challenged when I said that about fuel contamination by a pilot, an airline pilot, saying we don't get contamination. We don't even have it in the truck. It comes up out of the ground, out of pipes. And I had to remind you and I, Greg, worked on a flame out.
Yeah, A330 Airbus coming out of Indonesia.
Right. And they were full of water because there was a pipe load of water that got into the airplane.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it does happen.
Yeah. For a variety of different reasons. So again, with all of this information basically, 3 days after a fatal accident like this, and everybody's already got their own conclusions based on 2 videos. It's just ridiculous to say, because none of us were in the cockpit, to say that one of the pilots mistakenly moved the flaps instead of the landing gear. It just doesn't make logical sense. Can it happen? Absolutely. You can never say never in aviation. But is it reasonable and logical to believe under these conditions at that time with these 2 pilots that would have occurred? Well, not when you have other physical evidence that's evident in the videos that says that didn't happen, just because here it is, the slats and the flaps are extended, they're deployed. Doesn't mean they're right, but again, and then I got there was a comment about the fact that on the 737 there's an auto slat deployment system. That's great on the 737. Now the 787 also has an auto slat deployment, but it's not as if the leading edge device were in the full up position, and if you forgot to set them, they would actually drop because of speed or angle of attack. It's not the way the system works on the 787. If you forget to set the flaps, or the flaps are at 0, it inhibits that auto slat deployment. And it's not really a deployment from 0. The slats already have to be in a down position or a deployed position. All it does is further extend the slats based on angle of attack and or airspeed that could get you into an aerodynamic stall. You have to understand the systems to really put the logic in the scenario together. Just because you got all these safety systems doesn't mean they are levels of protection under certain circumstances.
Add one more thing about the investigation before I forget. There's a lot of stuff out there online, especially visual stuff, people having evidence of what happened during the flight and after the flight. Some of that stuff will be very, very valuable for the investigators. So if you're out there and you have something on your cell phone or your security camera, get them to the investigative authorities. And a second word to those specific individuals who have posted online bodies or pieces of bodies. That has no place in the investigation in the way it's being put out there in the public. It's not helping bring closure to the families. Unless you're giving it directly to the investigators, it's not helping the investigation that much. If you happen to have something that has that sort of stuff in it, and you have other wreckage and whatnot, it might be useful to the investigation. Get them to the investigators.
Yeah.
That group of people I saw in one video where there's like a body part on the ground and a dozen people with phones taking pictures of that body part. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I know. It is very devastating. We've all seen it. I mean, I went through it numerous times on big aircraft accidents where, and we've seen pilfering of body parts for jewelry and a variety of other things. It's sickening to see it and know that it's a high probability that it's happening, especially in places that are isolated. So, and yeah, I mean, where this airplane crashed, it was in a downtown area, but if you find something, it's in an isolated area and no one's looking over your shoulder, who's going to know? And that's the devastating part, especially for the families. But, there is a lot of investigation yet to be done. We may not see or hear a lot of the information that we would typically get out of an investigation conducted by the NTSB here in the United States 3 days after the accident, especially as it relates to information coming off the flight data recorder or the cockpit voice recorder. The rest of the world doesn't operate the same way we do. We operate with a high level of transparency. One of the missions of the board is to provide the general public with factual information so they can understand the process and the progress of the investigation. We don't always see that around the rest of the world. So it could be days, could be months, it could be that 3 months before we really know what's valid and what's invalid when it comes to data, which again always leads to greater speculation. If a factoid or at least a perceived factoid slips out and then everybody builds a storyline around it. Hell, for all we know, I mean, I've seen people talking about the fact that they've had brake problems on this airplane. Oh, it's obvious that, excuse me, it's obvious that the brakes were hung up. That is, that they were inadvertently left on, or they had clamped down. The airplane couldn't accelerate normally, and that was. How do you get that? I mean, out of a factoid that, yeah, okay, there's a problem with the brakes on other aircraft. We don't know the circumstances. We don't know what caused it. We don't know if it's a systems issue, but another new storyline as to why the airplane didn't accelerate normally. I've also heard, well, given the heat and that kind of stuff, it could have been a wind shear. Really, the wind wasn't blowing that hard. There wasn't any convective action in the area. Okay, yeah, you can get turbulent air from high heat radiating off the ground. Look, I mean, we can come up with 1,000 scenarios, and I made a smart ass comment in my Facebook post saying all of these great storylines are good for TV ratings and movies, but it has no place in accident investigation and aviation safety. So there is a lot yet to be learned. And again, all we try to do, and all I try to do individually, as I know you do, is just explain factually why something is incorrect, why someone's statement isn't based on valid fact. And that, okay, it may pan out a month from now, and I may be full of it. Great. But based on what I'm seeing at this point in time, I'm not speculating to the cause. I'm not saying who did what and who caused what. I'm just saying that it is illogical to think that two professional flight crew members would have failed to set the flaps on a 787 and tried to take off when you have so many safeguards built into an airplane like this, as well as others, but especially this airplane, because it is, for all intent and purposes, a smart airplane.
Now, aviation safety doesn't stop. Obviously, this was a huge event, and this will be one we'll be talking about for months and maybe even years. But coincidentally, about a day after this crash, we had another potentially huge issue come up in aviation safety. That is an ongoing shooting war between Iran and Israel. Now, those of you watching the video version of this, I have a couple of freeze frames from Flight Radar 24. One was a week ago today, showing the planes going across that part of the Middle East and southern Europe. The next shot, exactly 7 days later, to the minute, and we have a big gap of planes going north of Iran and Israel and south of Iran and Israel. And that's just one of the first effects of this war, but there could be more. There is news from Iran saying, well, they might be thinking of doing something in the Strait of Hormuz. And those of you who are geography nuts will know that in that southern corridor, there are a bunch of aircraft flying right over that area. The least thing that could happen if they do that is they'll be diverting aircraft further. But I'd like those of you out there who might be planning on flying to think about this more deeply. A, there's an active war in that area. If you're planning on flying through that area, should you continue with your plans? Should you make alternative plans? Should you stay at home? These are things to consider. And then there's a wild card. What if one of the factions launch something that has either radiological or a nuclear weapon in it? That could be grounding aircraft all over the world for a whole bunch of reasons. So just want to throw that out there and what you two would advise for folks who are thinking of traveling in that area.
Stay home, sit in your living room, watch it on TV. No, I'm just kidding. We know that aviation is not going to stop. But we've seen this before. We saw it in the Ukraine when they shot down MH17. It was an active war zone there. This airplane was shot down. But there was some at least precursor information to start diverting traffic around that potential war zone. And it is incumbent, and I know professional pilots, especially airlines, are very cognizant of these issues. But again, you may have a private operator or even a charter operator who isn't really plugged in, who's going to try and take a shortcut across all of that territory, to get their customer, their passenger, point A to point B most expeditiously. Next thing you know, you're flying through a war zone where missiles are flying. So it is incumbent upon any flight crew, private or commercial, to do their homework, to be fully cognizant and briefed on what's going on, not only the day of, but watch it as a trend. Because if things are starting to escalate, you could basically flight plan your trip thinking everything is good to go, at least for the day that I intend to fly. Next thing you know, you're airborne and they start shooting at each other. You better have plan B. John?
It's best to stay away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think hopefully we've given at least our listeners and viewers a better understanding of the details, that you cannot just come up with these simple conclusions based on what we've seen in the videos for Air India. There is a lot of backstory. There is a lot of back investigation that needs to be done. There is a lot of validation of data that needs to be performed. And in whatever's left of that airplane, that seems to be in reasonable shape, without a lot of induced damage from whatever movement has occurred now after the event. All of that has to be taken into account to give the investigators the best evidence to determine the best cause and contributing factors based on that data. And it may take some time, but again, all we're trying to do is just give explanation, and we will continue to do that. And we appreciate the insight, the comments, and even the questions from our viewers and listeners, because we can research it, we can clarify it, we can help you understand it better. That's why I put the chart in part of my my discussion about the flaps and the perspective from the video on Facebook, and we're going to have it on our show here and on our website, so that you understand it. It may not be right, it may not have been proper, but at least you understand why something looks like it was up when in fact it was actually down. It wasn't down as we may have formed that mental picture. And a lot of pilots go, well, the flaps weren't down because they weren't trailing. The trailing edge wasn't down. On a Cessna 150 or a Cessna 172, it's pretty evident that when you go to the first setting of flaps, you can actually see the change in shape of the wing. These are Fowler flaps, right, John?
Right.
Why, yes, they are. And these Fowler flaps, they don't immediately move straight down. They move out, aft, and then down. And anybody
increasing the surface of the wing.
Correct.
That's all you're doing. And then when you want a drastic increase, you drop it down. Now the air has to go around. That's all you're doing, is increasing the upper surface of the wing.
And in fact, not only do the flaps move on this airplane, but where the ailerons are, that portion of the wing actually moves out as well. So now with basically the whole back of the wing coming out aft in almost a straight line, it has no delineation until those flaps then go trailing edge down. So you don't see the aft movement, and you can't discern it in a video, but you can see it in the picture with the airplane on the ground. There's a picture of the wing. You can actually see that the wing is extended some distance, which indicates that the flap had been deployed in one of those lower flap settings. So that's the kind of information. And that's why all of the chatter on the internet needs to be taken with a grain of salt till we have hard fact to verify or validate it. So with that, Todd, I will leave you with our second to the last word.
Well, as many of you who follow this channel, even if you don't follow this channel, 2025 has been, let's just say, an extraordinarily busy year for aviation safety. And this event is no different in that whatever was the cause, there will be education and learning out of this. Whatever caused this accident, things will be put in place to make it less likely to happen, as is the case with the midair over DC, as with the case with the helicopter in New York City that killed a family of tourists, as with all the other high-profile events you see. So if you're concerned about aviation safety, so are we. I would say be less concerned about the reduction of risk. There will be learning, there will be risk reduction, things will get better.
Well said. John, with that, you're going to have to follow that up with our last word.
Well, that was a good second last word. And I'm going to deviate from what I normally say. just going to ask everybody to take all the information that you see out there with a grain of salt, including ours. All right, we're just going to put the pieces of the puzzle on the table. All right, there's a lot of pilots that listen to our show, many, in the thousands. All right, corporate pilots and commercial airplane pilots. Like, pay attention to your job. Understand what's going on with your airplane. Right? Just, you got to be very focused today. There's just too much going on. And please, please fly safely.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. We really value all of our listeners and subscribers. Our podcast gets ranked by you. So if you like this, give us 5 stars inside your podcast platform.
We want to keep the conversation going with you. So we'd love for you to engage with us on our social media channels. We're on Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course, YouTube.
You can email the show at flightsafetydetectives@gmail.com. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, we're working on growing this channel, and it really helps if you all comment. So please do that. We read them all.
And be sure to subscribe. Avemco Insurance Company has thousands of 5-star reviews on trustpilot.com. Here's one from Henry K., who said, "For more than 18 years, Avemco has insured me and my aircraft. The cost has been very reasonable and the service excellent. Completely satisfied. The only claim I ever had was handled quickly and to my complete satisfaction. Avemco is a first-rate insurer. Experience the advantage going direct with Avemco Insurance Company. Call 888-879-0389 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/flightsafety. And don't forget to tell them the Flight Safety Detective sent you for 5% off your premium.